Hi, my name is Peter Fisk. So, Innovation Recoded is all about solving human problems with more creative insights and ingenuity. I think the big challenge for innovation today is to solve bigger problems and to solve them better. We spend all of our time working on things like smart socks, trying to incrementally improve small things in most of our innovation endeavors. But innovation is much more than about slightly better products or even about just applying some technological advance to those products. It's really about how do we solve the big problems, in our world, the big challenges which we have. And also how can we use these new capabilities such as digital technologies and data and so on, to be able to solve them in new and more enlightened ways. So let's start by thinking about ingenuity. It was the great guy, Ken Robinson, who really defined the difference between imagination, creativity, and innovation. He said imagination is about exploring new possibilities, and capturing them is new ideas. You have to codify them in some way. Creativity is about shaping and stretching the potential of new ideas, of existing ideas. But innovation is about taking existing ideas by this point and making them practical, or in the business world, making them profitable. So you need imagination to move forwards, to explore the new possibilities. And then you need creativity to actually stretch them and to apply them in some way before innovation takes hold and actually makes them happen. One great way to start off is to use the Imagination Sundial. This is a fantastic new tool. And it really looks at different ways in which you can be more imaginative. The space which you can kind of occupy in terms of ways of thinking. The places where you can go to bring people together or to be immersing yourselves in new environments, new ideas and cultures. The practices which allow you to be more imaginative, to stretch your mind, to see new possibilities. And the pacts which allow you to actually embrace that and to accept that into business and the existing rules by which we think and we work. So using the Imagination Sundial is a great starting point to be able to stretch yourselves and to be able to see something new and then to start to codify it. Great example of imagination comes from René Redzepi. He runs one of the world's best restaurants based in Copenhagen. Now, at Noma, he also has something called the Nordic Food Lab. And what he believes is that everything which we eat should come from nature, and we should use the things which are naturally around us in our local environments. So every day he goes out, and often he takes groups of people with him to educate them in terms of looking for whatever is available in the forests or in the countryside around Copenhagen. And then he'd come back and he'd spend the rest of the day preparing a menu, often sort of 20 courses of phenomenal, different tasting gastronomic delights, but actually preparing them in different ways. And thinking about how can you use the best of science and technology and cooking capabilities, but at the same time, how can you get the best out of nature and the connections within nature? But what innovators typically say is that actually the best way to start innovating is actually to say, what is the question I'm trying to answer? Hal Gregersen, a professor at MIT, he says that better questions are the real secret to leading to better innovation. And too often we kind of just have the wrong question and we work too fast in terms of just trying to get to the answer quickly. We do some brainstorming, as we're all familiar with. We slap a number of ideas onto a whiteboard. And then suddenly we can then spend the next number of months trying to make those quick half thought out ideas happen. Often we're solving the wrong problem. So finding out what is the right problem to solve is a creative challenge in itself. And there's a fantastic number of techniques called question bursts, for example, which are about really creatively exploring the question or the problem before you even move in towards solving the right problem. And one of the best ways to see the problem is actually to take a different perspective. And in the business world, the best perspective I think you can take is from the outside in. You know, when we work in business, we get obsessed with what we do. If we're a bank, we're obsessed with money, we're obsessed with interest rates, for example. And we forget that actually the customer is actually trying to fund their child's education or hospital fees, or they're trying to go on a vacation, or they're trying to buy a new Gucci handbag. So we're focused on the wrong thing. We're not connecting with actually what the customer is really thinking. By thinking from the customer perspective, you see a bigger world. And within that bigger world, that bigger circle, if you like, you typically see all sorts of opportunities which you might miss otherwise. A great example of this is the story of the lucky ironfish. And the lucky ironfish story starts off in Cambodia, where a British guy was actually doing a PhD project in terms of looking at how could he relieve the rampant amounts of anemia or iron deficiency in that part of the world. And through lack of the best nutrition, he realized that many people were living in lives of iron deficiency or even dying from it. So how could he kind of solve that problem? Particularly in a world where, traditional medicines were expensive or inaccessible to many people. And he spent some time really looking at how can you solve that problem in a different and a better way? What is it which is causing the deficiency, and how could you overcome the deficiency? And actually he realized one of the biggest problems by observing people was that actually people are no longer cooking in iron pots. Instead, they've moved to stainless steel pans. So what if they could revert to iron pots in some way? Well, actually they wouldn't, because they were too expensive or unwieldy. So he actually came across this idea of putting a lump of iron into their cooking pot. But then when he started doing this, most of the local Cambodian people reacted in horror. Why would I put a dirty lump of iron into the cooking pot? And he thought, well, how am I going to kind of engage them in terms of wanting to do that? So he kind of spent some time looking at the local culture. And he realized that actually one of the symbols of good luck within that local culture is the lucky iron fish, or the lucky fish rather. So what he then created was his iron lump in the shape of a fish. And then when he gave this lump of iron, now shaped as a fish, to people, they all understood that they want to put this into their pot because it could be lucky for them. Over the next 3 years, he rolled out his business in terms of making lucky ironfish as a charity, and now he's almost eradicated iron deficiency in that part of the world. And the Lucky Ironfish project continues into other countries, and really being one of the most effective ways in which culturally, more than scientifically, you can actually solve a medical problem. So quite often, innovation is about making unusual connections. And it was actually Leonardo da Vinci, with Mona Lisa fame, who actually was one of the great persons who first demonstrated that unusual connections were the way in which you could move forwards. He is an individual. He started off as a sculptor. His sculpting got better when he studied anatomy. So by studying anatomy and how the human body and the bones and the levers and so on work, that allowed him to create better sculptures. By working in 3 dimensions, he was actually able to, when he came to painting, to create much more dramatic works of art, like the Mona Lisa. And then as an inventor of things like the catapult, for example, years and years before it eventually became mainstream. He was able to understand the mechanics of the human body and then translate that into machines, and even creating blueprints for things like the helicopter today. So making these unusual connections is really powerful. Tinker Hatfield, who is the chief designer of Nike, the sportswear company, the Air Jordan, which is the most successful sneaker of all time, actually finds its inspiration from the Georges Pompidou Center in Paris. And that ability to see a building which has actually got its inside outside in terms of its infrastructure on the outside of the building, he then said, well, how can I bring that to the shoe? And created something which was truly different at the time compared to anything else available. One of the other ways of innovating is to really think not only how can I kind of take one idea from a place, but how can I change many aspects of what's going on. I call these game changers, because they don't only just change the product or even change the way the business itself works, but they change the way the marketplace works. Cirque du Soleil is a great example of eclipsing the traditional circus, which turned up in your local town, which had wild animals, which charged a small fee for kids to go along and to kind of laugh at the clown and to be amazed by the acrobats and to see the tigers. Today, in a world of much more responsibility, we don't have live animals in circuses anymore. But Cirque du Soleil has changed it. It's made it a work of art. It's created global themes, brands, if you like, which people will pay more money to go and see than the best operas, the best shows on Broadway. So changing the why, changing the who, changing the what, changing the how are all different ways in which you can think about not just kind of product innovation, but innovating every aspect of your business, from the reason why you do it, through to the way you do it, through to the way in which you make money from it. And technologies are often the answer behind allowing us to do some of these things. They're not the answer in themselves, but they enable us to move forwards in fundamentally new ways, particularly the connected technologies, the intelligent technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. But the real challenge is to connect humanity and technology together. To say, how can we innovate the way people work or to do things at the same time as we make the technology enabling of that new capability? So how can I make faster, better decisions? How can I carry in incredible heavy loads? How can I be superhuman, if you like, in some ways? So innovating the soft things, the human things, the cultural things, if you like, remember Lucky Ironfish, at the same time as innovating the technology becomes really, really important for us to think about. A great example of a human transformation comes from India. This guy, Devi Shetty, he was actually the young doctor who was looking after Mother Teresa during the final years of her life. And he took so much inspiration from this marvelous old lady that he said, I don't just want to be a doctor or even a heart surgeon, as he was training to be in subsequent years. I want to actually make a fundamental difference to the entire way my country lives and its healthcare. And what he did was to really rethink how hospitals can work, particularly in emerging markets like his native India. Today, he actually is responsible, doesn't do himself, but responsible for over 300 heart surgeries every single day. He has a network of hospitals which span across every major town and city in India and other countries too. And he's even created a low-cost healthcare system, health insurance system, which allows people to put a small amount of money from their salaries or even for employees to put it in for them so that they can afford access to better healthcare. So really changing the way in which we think about business models and operational models in terms of the ways in which organizations work. David Kelly, he's the guy who created the design school, or the D School, at Stanford University. He's the guy who created IDEO, one of the world's leading design companies. He coined the phrase design thinking, which we know of today is not just about doing some research to say what do people want and then start creating a solution to it, but actually immersing yourselves in their world. Immersing yourselves in watching. How do people do their washing, for example? How do they kind of put things into the washing machine? How do they take them out? What's the challenge in drying them, or in terms of folding them or ironing them afterwards? And therefore, how could you solve that problem which they're having in different ways? By having more empathy with the actual user of the product, and empathy with the challenge or the things which the user is trying to achieve. He actually calls the bigger idea human-centered design. So starting with the human being and how can you make life better for people? And he argues that human-centered design and design thinking together actually are an incredibly powerful way in which you can solve real problems for real people. Katrina Lake is an example of somebody who's really taking business and business models to the next stage. She's in the business of retailing, fashion retailing, and she will send you a box of clothes every month. You subscribe to it, and this box is a set of different items, typically 10 to 15 items, which for a set fee, and you can choose different prices, you can choose from, and anything you don't want, you send back. But guess what? Every time somebody sends back stuff, she learns what they dislike. So she learns more and more from every single transaction each month in terms of what is it, the colors, the styles, the items which people like most. And so she can truly individualize using big data. She can truly individualize the box and the things inside it, which she sends to people each month. And human behavior is that typically once you've seen it and you've tried it on, you're more likely to keep it. And so she's made Stitch Fix an incredibly successful direct-to-consumer subscription-based service. And it's one example of many, many different ways in which you can innovate in business today. This was a model created by a company called Dublin, and it looks at the 10 different ways which typically you can innovate. Most companies spend most of their time focused on products and the product system, if you like. But actually, that's the least effective in terms of creating value or creating impact. The most effective ways, on one side, it's the customer experience and how you can engage the customer in that much more. So, for example, offering additional services beyond the product itself, be able to offer a better kind of style in which you deliver that service. But the most effective way, certainly from an economic value creation point of view, is actually by innovating the way in which you make money. Innovating the network, the system by which you work, innovating the processes by which you work, and most importantly, innovating the profit model, the revenue streams, the way in which people pay. And so innovating any one, or actually usually a combination of a number of these different types of innovation, is a great starting point to think about how truly can you move your business forward. And there are so many different types of business models. It's actually unlimited in terms of taking different ideas from different places. Some of the most popular, which I'm sure you're familiar with, start off from the razor and blades model, where you buy the razor at a very low price, or the Nespresso machine at a very low price, and then you pay a high fee for the razor or the coffee pods on a frequent basis, and you subscribe to that typically, but because you bought this razor, you keep buying the same brand of blades or the same brand of coffee. And many, many other business models exist in the world today, as you can see. A great example is ARM Technologies in the business-to-business world. It makes more semiconductors for your phones, your tablets, your laptops than any other company. Although I'm wrong in saying it makes them, because it actually doesn't make anything. What it realized was that the speed of change of their devices in terms of new products, which companies like Apple and Samsung are kind of producing, means that you're constantly having to change the design, the specifications of these devices as consumers want different things and as technology progresses at great speed. So instead of having a huge stock of one type of chip in your warehouse like Intel might have, it constantly is working with many, many different partners around the world in order to create customized versions, rapidly changing versions of the different semiconductor designs. So ARM is basically a design company. It's an intangible asset, an intellectual property company. So it creates the ideas, and then it gets many, many other people in its wide ecosystem across the world to make those things happen. And that gives it so much more speed and agility to meet the exacting needs, the personalized needs, if you like, of an ever-changing world. So the challenge in innovation is really to accelerate the ways in which you can solve problems, the ways in which you can take new ideas to market. The best way to accelerate ideas to market is to have a better view of the future. You bring your people together, not just in your innovation team, but the strategic decision makers, the exec team, the strategy people, the finance people, the human resource people. Bring together your organization leaders with a better view as to where you're going next. To work from the future back so that you actually have a view as to what ultimately you're trying to get to, and you can build the capabilities and you can start to build the success model towards the future rather than just trying to drag out a bit more from today's business. Then find smarter ways to innovate. That might be through design thinking. It might be through framing things in different ways. It might be actually taking a concept and test and learning things very, very quickly, like the lean startup. Or it might be about thinking, how can you build platforms by which then you can constantly evolve different types of products and services from the same platform over time. And then have the ability to not just launch the product, that's really just the start, but to think about then how can you implement and scale that up over time. Because once you've launched a product, you're constantly learning what works and what doesn't work with real people. So how can you adapt it? How can you change it, or pivot as we call it? But also, how can you shape the marketplace, the way in which markets work, the prices people pay, where they buy things from, how they get additional services from the broader ecosystem, like apps for the App Store, for example. So how does that market evolve, and how can you innovate that marketplace over time as well to your advantage? And one final thought comes from the Moonshot Factory. The Moonshot Factory is a small building to the side of Google's main offices in California. It's a company which is set up to work on the big ideas, the things which the normal business weren't able or weren't prepared to even think about. And today, X, which is the name of the Moonshot Factory, is actually run by a guy called Astro Teller. He calls himself Captain of Moonshots, much better name than the CEO. And they're working on all sorts of crazy ideas. And this might be about ways in which you can mine the resources on asteroids as they're passing planet Earth, for example, or it might be in terms of hot air balloons, which can give unlimited Wi-Fi access to anybody who wants it around the world. But the interesting thing, there's lots of interesting things, but one of the really interesting things of the Moonshot Factory is when you walk into their building, you see lots and lots of clever people doing incredible experiments trying to solve big problems. But they have around the walls, they have this mantra, and it says, why be 10% better when you could be 10 times better? So just think about that. Most of us spend most of our time just trying to extend our existing products and services, our existing way of doing business. 10% sounds pretty good. If you had 10% growth, you're pretty happy with that. But actually, imagine if you had 10 times better. Imagine if you had 10 times more customers. Imagine if you were 10 times more profitable, if your costs were 10 times cheaper. And then you go, well, how can I do that? But actually, if you get that 10 times challenge, you probably actually start to solve the problem in different ways. Let me give you a challenge. If you had a car, and I gave you the challenge of I want that car to work one team, they have to improve the fuel efficiency, to go from 50 miles per gallon to 10% better, 55 miles per gallon. The other team, I'm going to say, how can you go from, say, 50 miles per gallon to 500 miles per gallon in terms of your fuel efficiency? The conventional team, the 10% team, will solve the problem in some normal way. And actually, we see most innovations in cars, for example, improving by that kind of amount. It can get that 10% better. But the 10 times team how we're going to make the car go at 500 miles per gallon, they have to think differently. And that's the point. They have to solve the problem in a different way. And actually, even if they fail, that's cool. Because, maybe they end up with 300 miles per gallon rather than 500 miles per gallon, 200 miles per gallon. It's a lot better than 55 miles per gallon. But by shifting our thinking and changing the problem to solve, we can actually often find much better solutions which can take us much further forwards and take us forward faster. And the final part of innovation is not just to do this one-off. It's to build a portfolio of innovations, not just innovations of products, but innovations of processes, innovations of experiences, innovations of business models, and have them stored up. Some of them to improve your business today. So how can I exploit the current business? But also, how can I explore the future? And have a series of different innovations which I can keep moving forwards. And that's, as Alex Osterwalder calls, creates an invincible company. One which can always be a step ahead. One which is always driving progress in new and exciting ways. And a great example is Fujifilm. You remember this Japanese company, they used to make Fuji camera film like Kodak film. But then we all got smartphones and we all forgot about cameras and film and all that kind of old process. And so Fujifilm had to change. And they innovated. And they actually realized that one of our skills is making good quality film. So we could use that in different marketplaces, different applications. So they moved into medical devices. They became a leader in terms of X-ray technology and other kinds of scanning technologies. They also realized that from there they could move into cosmetics, because actually cosmetics are a very thin film on the human body's skin. And so they could create better cosmetics with their capabilities. And from there they moved from cosmetics into actually healthcare solutions such as new medicines. So Fujifilm is a great example of having a portfolio of innovations and constantly evolving but revolving their business at the same time in thinking of how can I create a better future. And the slogan which they use is never stop. Never stop transforming ourselves and never stop transforming the world. So that's really part of what Business Recoded is all about, my new book, which really looks at this as part of the challenge of creating enlightened progress, driving growth, thinking about how can you create new markets, being more ingenious at the same time, and using partners in order to achieve that and to transform your business in an ongoing, never stop kind of way. And for you to be a better leader at the same time, an extraordinary leader, if you like, because leaders are the best innovators. They're the people who are innovating the future, innovating the business, taking you forward to a better place. So there's 49 codes in Business Recoded, ways in which we've dissembled or deconstructed all the best ideas from all the best companies right now in the business world. And what it gives you is an opportunity to recode your business in a way which is relevant and enlightened for you to innovate your entire business future. So take a look at some of the 49 codes and think about really where are the opportunities for you to do better and to do great and to do amazing things. Business Recoded, this program is one of 5 about the future, about growth, and also about work and leadership. So I hope you enjoyed it. But for now, be bold, be brave, be brilliant. And thank you very much for joining us.